You made it! An update on driving the Honda Pilot for the better half of a year, or 13,000 miles. We've taken this slightly off-road, we've taken to the track as a camera car, family duty, road tripping, basically everything you can do with this we've done over the course of a year. So you're here because you want to know the pros and the cons, so I'm not going to make this a long video, make it more digestible. So let's start with the exterior. Depending on the trim, you can get more of the off-roady look or more of this urban SUV. Because it looks more truckish, it definitely has a good presence. The way that I viewed it is it slides under the radar just enough. If you're at a more conservative school and you have kids where, people aren't driving around with $100,000 luxury SUVs, you pull up in this and nobody gives you a second look. It's also unassuming on the road. People aren't trying to blow past you like you're in a minivan. It doesn't have any social stigmas. It's just stylish enough without being douchey. And that's what I really like as a family vehicle. Now, when you walk around this, depending on your paint color, it's held up pretty well. The paint doesn't have an enormous amount of orange peel. It's taken some decent amount of abrasions in the clear coat, and everything looks pretty solid. Nothing's falling off. The gaps are good, and the overall fit and finish has maintained its good style. The tires have also held up pretty good over 13,000 miles, and again, we've had this on track as well. The Bridgestone lenses seem to balance really good driving dynamics in the dry, trades off a little bit in the snow, of course, is an all-season, but pretty decent in the wet. The interior space is where you're going to live, and this is where I found some pros and cons. I think the thing that this does great, namely compared to their MDX, which if you're looking at a luxury vehicle, you kind of want some of this here, and this is where the Pilot is way better than a lot of their luxury equivalents. The door storage is a great example of how you do a three-row SUV. You can fit a larger refillable bottle, a big one. There's nothing to obstruct it. There's little tiny pockets for hand sanitizer, tissues, Kleenex, garbage. You can still fit your phone in there. You can fit a whole bunch of stuff without tearing into your center console space. While yes, the door is very matte, it lacks a lot of contrasting tone. I think it's held up really well from like sunscreen scratches. It doesn't look horrible. Basically, it's there for usability. The center console is really amazing. You can fit two phones, one wireless charger. There's a little nook here, again, for a key or Kleenex or whatever you want. The actual cup holder space is really big. It fits almost every type of bottle. Again, a refillable water bottle that most every size is going to fit in here without fighting it. And then you have that storage space in the dashboard, again, for a phone for the passenger, and that passenger door space. This is the ultimate vehicle if you need all that stuff, if you have multiple people in here. We're talking a couple adults or three adults and two kids. You're going to have enough space if you don't want to go to the minivan. Honda did a great job here. Now, in terms of like the gauge cluster and all that, the configurability really is not as good as some of the other brands. You kind of just leave this static to your fuel economy or your tire pressure and you just leave it. It's definitely not going to blow you away. And the infotainment is a mixed bag. This is their older generation based on Android. I'm using it for Android Automotive or Apple CarPlay, and it works fine for that. When you're outside of it, it's just a very generic UI. It's stuck up on the dash. I wish it was more integrated. It doesn't look great, but so far it's been functional, and even profile switching between phones is relatively quick, but oftentimes if you have more than 2 or 3 phones in here, it's going to get confused. Even if you set it as priority, it doesn't always reconnect. So just be aware of that. If you're just one phone paired, you're not going to have any issues. HVAC controls and all the physical controls are amazing. It's one of the best parts about this. You getting and turning the the second row off is just as easy as hitting one button here. You don't have to menu jump. You don't have to go through the infotainment. And I think that's why you're really going to like this. It's just simple one-tap things to do all of your core functions. And a lot of that thoughtfulness goes right into the back seats where all of the adjustment is physical. There's no like motorized stuff for everything. So if you want to recline the seat, it's like a millisecond. You want to fold down the seats, it's basically one touch and everything's flipped down. Taking the second seat, which I've left the second seat out, reveals these 2 enormous anchors, which I need to harness myself in or tie things down. Getting in the third row with that second seat out is amazing. You can fit that second row center seat in the trunk, in the hatch, under the floor with the tie downs that are included. And then when you take the seats, put the seats down in the back, that's where this thing is amazing. Jack fit 4 enormous Aston Martin wheel and tires in the back, plus a huge tool chest. And when you use this as a hauler like that, you're really gonna appreciate it. It's not like Suburban, it's not body on frame storage, it's not minivan, but it really does bridge the gap. And there's so many things that it does good, as a vehicle in terms of driving dynamics. that are excellent about this. The negative parts, really, from my perspective, is it's just kind of like a doldrum. It's very monochromatic, and this is current generation Honda. As much as it is very basic and functional and everything works, it lacks any type of color contrast in it. Yeah, they do some like a little bit of silver, and there's some piano black, which honestly it doesn't need it in here, but I feel like they need something more contrasting colors. Not super glossy, but it does feel very, very dark in here all the time. So we're going to take this for a drive. I'm going to talk you through some of the pros and the cons of how this drives and how it behaves on the road. All right, the drive and the Pilot. I'm going to cover some of the good and bad. Let's start with a launch. The V6, I mean, it's disappearing, right? Namely in the naturally aspirated form. It's an engine that's really smooth and buttery. It has a good resonance to it. The negative part, of course, is you really have to rip it. You would think you'd have a surge of power, but because it doesn't make a ton of torque like a lot of the turbocharged engines, you have to spend more time, foot down to do some passing maneuvers. It's just more old school. And the other negative part about the V6, at least in the Honda implementation, is, and I'm not quite sure from a tuning perspective how this happened or why, but my lifetime is 20 miles per gallon. And this doesn't make a ton of power, so you have to live with that concept. If you're okay with it, well, there's not a lot of downers about it. But there are some downers in terms of drivability. One is the 10-speed automatic is a little jerky off throttle. There's always just kind of a little bit of hesitation or jerk, namely when you're in the higher gears, you're just cruising along kind of on and off, and there's always this not I wouldn't say a knocking, but a jerk in the transmission. It's not the smoothest gearbox ever. You'll notice that off the line, there's always just a little bit of hesitation before you feel the torque transfer. It's one of those things that bothers me the more that I've driven it, and it's definitely not a deal breaker, but you'll notice it more and more as you drive it. The other thing that is frustrating to me is the start-stop system, and you definitely have to go in here. There's a way to disable it by a physical button, but you have to do it every single time you drive. It doesn't remember it. And obviously you're gonna leave this in normal mode. Most of the time you're not gonna be in one of the sport mode settings just because it's pointless. And the start-stop is just really jerky. Again, it's one of those little tiny things that grate on you after a while, even though you get used to it. I'd prefer, with crappy fuel economy anyway, let me just leave the engine running when I'm driving to eliminate one more thing. The last negative thing about this vehicle is, and you don't notice it really when you're by yourself, but it's the braking system. This is definitely on the softer side in terms of brake pedal pressure compared to most Hondas. Usually you get that instantaneous bite, which I know a lot of us complain about. It's like an on and off switch. It's not that way here. It's a really progressive pedal. It's really kind of easy to use, but you notice it takes a lot more brake force to get this thing to stop when you have more people in it. And you get 2 or 3 adults in here, and your brake pedal pressure and your stopping distance increases quite a bit. I feel like the braking system is under provisioned in the Pilot. So those are the 3 things or 4 things that I really I'm not fond of driving this. But the last part about it is really what it does great, and that is it maintains extreme nimbleness. This is one of the better, more nimble driving SUVs. The steering is just quick enough without being super heavy to get around corners. You feel extreme confidence. The way that the torque vectoring rear differential is set up, the rear diff in this car, because it can send power to the left or the right exclusively, this car is super quick to get around. It's super easy. It will even kind of rotate itself without terminally understeering depending on your tire choice. And what that does is it's more of a joy to drive for a bigger SUV. Namely compared to the Hyundai and Kia counterparts and some of the Ford and Chevy versions where they're kind of like just rip the front tires off you always feel that front wheel drive part of that. You don't feel that in the Pilot as much with the way that the all-wheel drive system's tuned. And the other big thing for me is the ride quality. This is just using traditional dampers and steel springs. No adaptive dampers here, and you'd think that would be a huge con, but their vehicle dynamics team and their suspension calibration team did a really good job of making this very, very compliant and soft over almost every pavement type without feeling like a boat. And the best part is it's still soft. It's soft to the point where you want an SUV to feel soft, where this thing is not rolling over on itself and feeling floppy and like, you know, it doesn't have that old school minivan feel to it. And it's one of the best things about it. In the front occupant area with the moonroof or sunroof closed, it's pretty quiet in the front, and it maintains pretty good road isolation. That airborne noise is probably a little bit worse in the back, and you'll notice it as you get to higher speeds. But overall, for a vehicle of this type in its price range, it is fairly quiet in a 3-row segment vehicle. I don't think it's top of the class, but it's certainly not going to grate on your nerves unless you're going like over 80 or 90 miles an hour. Definitely that airborne noise gets much worse then. But, you know, I think that's kind of where I'm going to leave this. You know, a lot of people are going to ask, you know, would you buy this again, like, would you actually buy this vehicle? And I think, you know, if you don't want to spend luxury car money, you don't want to be spending 70, 80,000, because it does go up quite a bit in terms of refinement. Even like the MDX, you know, that's kind of almost in that price range of this when you get on the upper trim levels of the Pilot. And the MDX is better. It's got a better suspension architecture in the front. It's quieter. It just is more refined. The audio system's better. But the thing is you trade off a lot with the MDX because of the storage, and the usability isn't as good in the front. So again, it's kind of what you value in this segment. I definitely would choose this as that daily driver over the Hyundai and Kia equivalents. Even though they might have nicer interiors in certain parts, it's just a better driving experience than the Pilot. I just feel a sense of stability and ease to drive in this, and it just kind of tried and true. You know, you're going to keep this for 5 or 6 years. You're going to be able to flip it. It's still going to hold its value really well. People are always going to want this. So that's another aspect of buying a family car, is like that residual factor, that keepability factor. This engine is not going to cost you an assload of money to keep up on. You know, the transmission, you know, Honda traditionally, their transmissions haven't been the most reliable, but this next generation is a little bit better. And everything with the body structure is not esoteric. You know, there's nothing crazy about this. The parts aren't going to be super expensive underneath. If you curb a wheel and bend a suspension part, you know, you're dealing with steel versus aluminum. Just a lot of little things like that are going to add up to be a better experience. I've had no maintenance charges with this other than doing a tire rotation and an oil change at 6,000 miles, and pretty much that's what you're going to expect to do to this thing. As long as you keep up with it, replace your tires on time, which might be more expensive depending on your trim level. I mean, that's pretty much all you have to know at this point. Anyway, good luck on your shopping. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.